I'm Mark Hill, and I'm very pleased to bring you on behalf of the British Bible School another something to think about, because I have indeed been thinking, always a dangerous proposition. But I belong to a fellowship that for a long time has made an appeal and has pleaded with people to make a return to New Testament Christianity, to be the church of the New Testament. We make an appeal to return to the old paths that we need to tread. And I understand the sentiment behind that and the meaning behind it, but I wonder what the people of the New Testament church in the first century made an appeal for themselves. Well, actually, we know they made an appeal to go back to something else. Many of the Jews who came into the church at that time made an appeal to go back to the law of Moses. This, of course, was unhelpful, but we understood that their comfort zone, where they found their identity, was in those things, and it was troubling for them to leave them behind, and they needed to help to separate themselves from it. It itself wasn't a bad thing, but the law of Moses didn't work because the people couldn't keep the law. It was something that was given, therefore, in preparation, letting people know that they needed a saviour. It was a shadow of what, or should I say who, was to come. It didn't succeed in helping people be better people. It just pointed out what was wrong. It failed because people couldn't keep it. So when we plead for return to New Testament Christianity, we're not doing anything new. People are always looking back to something that they thought was better. And when we plead to be the church of the New Testament, we're not really that either. They didn't have church buildings, they didn't have holiday Bible clubs, they didn't have summer camps or anything like that. Are those things bad? Of course they're not. It's where we teach people about Jesus. We use things and we use ways in which to get the message across. But something that I feel has been unhelpful to us is this idea of trying to follow a particular pattern. You see, we don't follow that pattern to the letter of the law, as it were. What are we really pleading for people to do? It is, of course, not just to follow a pattern, but to follow the one who that pattern should lead them to. It is to lead us to Christ. We're not following a pattern, we're following a person. This person, Jesus, and the message that he brings is something that has stayed the same and will always stay the same because truth never changes. And the funny thing is, Jesus said that he himself is truth. So if we're following the truth, we're following Jesus, who is the truth, not just words on a page. Those words on the pages of the Bible are to lead us to understand who Jesus is and who he was representing here on earth and what he was doing on our behalf as sinners who needed a saviour. We are being taught through the Bible how to be in a relationship with Jesus and how to stay in a relationship with him. To appeal to our culture today, we cannot be the church as it was in the New Testament. In the New Testament times, in the first century, it was a different culture. God's word can go into any culture and into any land, and it can speak to any person and help them to be saved, which is a good thing after all. We are all sinners, and we all need this saving message. The difficulty we have is recognizing that this message is for every age and for every culture. So to reach out with that message, we need to understand our culture. You know, if we go on, or when we go on foreign missions, if anyone listening to this has been on a foreign mission, how do you prepare? You find out about the place you're going to. You look at their customs. You look at their belief systems that are already in place. What is it predominantly that they believe? How can we meet that with the gospel? What customs do they have that we might inadvertently offend them over, so that we can go into that place and understand what not to do, so we don't create a barrier by doing something offensive? We take all this time and energy to go into that place and make things as smooth as possible to reach out with the gospel in a way that they understand. Well, how do we prepare for those places around about the building where we meet, whether it's a church building or a community centre? How do we prepare to take the gospel out to them? I'm speaking in the UK, of course, so let's make it personal. We have our church culture, and we expect people outside of it, in a culture that's changed, to come into our culture. So the mistake that we're making is that we're asking people to observe a pattern rather than to meet Jesus. So what do we do about this? We, of course, need to know Jesus by our study of the scriptures, not to follow a pattern, but to follow him. We are then to take this wonderful soul-saving message out to everyone that we can, without compromise. The Apostle Paul did this by being all things to all people. He put himself into their shoes and made the message relevant to their situation, so it was attractive to them. He would speak to Jews about things that were relevant to them. Then non-Jews, the Gentiles, he will speak to them in a way that was relevant to them. It was the same message, but his approach was different because of their different cultures and background. For example, he met a group who worshipped many gods, and they even had an unknown God just in case. Did he berate them for their foolishness and their paganism? Of course not. He commended them for their desire to know God, and then explained who the unknown God was. And in explaining him, he dismantled the belief of all the other deities that they'd made up. But that way in was done because of his approach, understanding who he was talking to and what they believed at the time. Now, it's hard to be all things to all people if we don't know who those people are. Communities have planning committees, don't they, to change anything. If you want to put a garage up at the side of your house, you've got to get planning permission. Does it fit in with the town plan? And towns do have a plan for where roads will run and how things will be built and where things will be built. Businesses do market research in order to study where their customers are and what they want and how to make their product more attractive to them. The armed forces analyse their enemies so they know what they need to do to meet the threat if ever there is one. And churches, of course, we keep having meetings and doing things the same old way in the hope that people will come through the door and be impressed. Sorry if that offends you, but it's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking all of these plans that are made in all these different ways, and if we just stay the same with a culture that changes around about us, we'll end up dying on the vine. We keep an eye on attendance so that we know the people in the building. But it's one thing to know our congregation and quite another to know our community. What often happens is that the church stays the same and the community changes. Actually, the church usually gets older as the community changes. Worse than that, individually speaking, as a Christian, if we stay the same and maybe even reverting back sometimes into our old self instead of growing and a difference being seen in us, people aren't going to recognise that there's something different. Are we less angry? Are we more patient? Do we talk more about Jesus than we used to? Or have we settled into a nice little pattern of life and no one can really tell now that Jesus has made any difference? How can our life relate to the lives of other people so that we can bring them to a knowledge of Jesus? The town centre where I live is going through a huge change at the moment, and that's probably the same with most town centres. But the marketplace doesn't have a market in it now. The stall holders have been moved to the periphery of the town centre. No longer will people walk through the stalls as they go from shop to shop. You have to go out there on purpose. This, of course, has caused much trouble and much debate. But the town planners have let the market stall holders know that everything is going to be all right in the end because of these new plans that they've made. But it won't be to a return to the marketplace. They've been promised that once the work is complete, everything will be well in a new home they're being given. Meanwhile, where the market stall holders used to be, it's going to be a place of dining and entertainment. Years ago, an out-of-town large retail park with free parking was built, and the popular shops moved out there. Their empty buildings, which used to be alive with activity, have stood empty for a while. So something had to change. Suggestions were made, plans were drawn up, and now we look forward to an invigorated and exciting town centre where we can socialise and be entertained and go to charity shops and betting shops. There was and is a clear plan for this town's future, as there are for most towns. The good old days are just a memory. The way you used to shop has changed. How you used to socialise on a Saturday down at the market has changed. It's just a memory. It won't be like that again, it'll be different. But for the town to survive, something had to change. Council leaders, for all their faults, are probably doing a better job than churches of reading how things are going and what changes need to be made to survive in the future. The school that I attended from the age of 5 to 10, apart from a brief spell when I went to a different school, was set in the heart of a community of young married couples. You see, the houses around that school were known as first-time buyer houses. You could get a mortgage. It was affordable in those days when those houses sold for about £7,000, I think, the old 2 up, 2 down terraced houses. But it was a good starter home for married couples, and of course they would start a family. The babies would grow and need to go to school, and there it was, right in their community. And so it was a thriving community. But as time went on, the children grew up, they went to university or moved away for work. The people got older and either moved away to a smaller place, or the larger families had to move out and get a larger home. And over time, as the university in the town was growing, landlords saw an opportunity and bought the houses, and the 2 up and 2 downs can have 4 people in them, 4 students paying rent, and it was a nice little earner. The school, by the way, is now a doctor's surgery. You see, it met the needs of that community, but the community changed, and now there's something else that better meets that need. Schools have been built in new estates where new families are going to be, but even that's changing when people can choose what school they go to. So there's no longer a sense of community as people in the community get to know each other at the school gates, because people are from here, there and everywhere, and that community feeling is lost. I'm digressing. But the point is, things change. Communities, especially, change over time. Are we reaching out in a way to our community that really touches them and appeals to them? Or are we doing the same old things, the same old way, hoping that other people will come back to that? Are you or your church stuck in your own history, like towns that get stuck in their own history and promote their history and want things to keep the same? It doesn't really work to help the town thrive. There has to be a movement. Have you been using the same methods to reach a changing community? Something that worked in the past, for some reason, doesn't seem to work today. You know, people say, if it was good enough for yesterday, it ought to be good enough for today. It worked 30 years ago, it should work now. Well, how's that going? Are you thriving on that? Now, let me be clear. I'm not talking about a different message, because I'm not talking about a different saviour. Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. He is the one who saves people from their sins. And the message that we receive from him is the only way in which we can be saved. But how do we approach people about Jesus. We are by no means going to change the message, but we must be willing to change our methods of communicating the message. So we must be willing to honestly measure how well our methods are working. We can't blame it on other people. We can't blame it on others being too secular. We must be willing to see what we are doing that needs to change. And if it's not working, we've got to be willing to change. And if necessary, change again. People are lost and they're going to hell. Isn't it worth the effort to try and reach them? Are they worth the effort? What about that generation that have faith in God but have lost faith in our church? Where's that generation gone or going? People I know are choosing to go to a group that doesn't teach the truth but somehow seems to have an attitude that attracts them, that somehow seems to give them a sense of belonging, and they're willing to forego the truth because of that feeling of belonging that they should have with those who have the truth. We've got the truth, but having the truth is not enough. It has to be practiced. Love has to be demonstrated. When was the last time you truly loved someone who was unlovable? When was the last time you accepted someone who really ought to be rejected? Are we putting our faith into practice to the extent that we're keeping that generation that doesn't want to be dragged back to the first century, but wants to reach their friends today? How are we going to cope with this? To know how to change and what to change, we have to know where we are and who we're attempting to reach. How are we going to become all things for the sake of reaching all people in our community? First of all, if we meet in a particular place, we need to know the people of that community. How can we reach them if we don't know them? We've got to get to know the neighbouring businesses, if there are any, and the families that are around. If the place is full of old people, leafleting about Sunday school and youth clubs isn't going to work. We've got to know who we're reaching out to. Are there businesses near where your church meets? Can you be of service to them? Are you able to open your door so they could bring their lunch? They don't have to stay in the office. They can come across to where your building is and you can offer them coffee, but just bring their own lunch and let them stay and chat for a while. What kind of families are in that area? How can you be of service to them? You need to read the local news or listen to the local radio. Not constantly, but get to know what's going on. Join in the debates locally. Write a letter to the editor, giving the biblical point of view of something that might be being discussed. Ring up the radio station. They love it, especially if you're controversial. Speak up for God and put forward the biblical point of view and let people know who you are and where you meet. So if people listening to that agree with you, they know where to come and find you. Get involved in the community some way. There are litter pickups that are organised by community groups now. Join that and get to chat with the people that are on the litter pickup. If nobody's doing that, you be the one to organise a litter pickup so you've got a way of meeting your neighbours. Do you need a better bus route in that area? Join the fight for a better bus route. Go to the meetings where you'll meet people from that community and find out things that they need. Find out who the local councillor is or who your local politician is. Write to them about issues. Don't stay quiet. Let them know there's a group of people here that disagree with this thing that's happening. Or write and encourage them. They get very few letters doing that. If they make a good decision, write and congratulate them and thank them and get to know them. Invite them to an event. Guess what will happen if they do? They'll bring the newspapers with them. They want people to know what they're doing for the community. Get them involved and get yourself some free advertising. Having known or got to know who's in our community, we've got to open the doors. Encourage, if you have a building, the use of your building. Don't keep it pristine for a few people to gather in for an hour on a Sunday or an hour in the week. Let the community use it. Boy Scouts or Girl Guides, social clubs, school events, coffee mornings. It's not sacrilege to do this, it's a building. And you want people in the community to know that you're there. Let them come along. Leave leaflets out. You don't have to overtly preach at them. Just have a chat over a coffee. But let people come and use your building, especially if you're in a community. Well, you might say we have a community centre. We can't do that. Yes, you can. You can go and volunteer. A community centre is at the centre of the community. So people in that area are using that centre. Can they see you? There's no use just being there on a Sunday. Go and volunteer for something in the week. Let people know who you are and that you're there on a Sunday. Do something to help so that you can be seen. When people come along, make it easy for them to attend. Give them a friendly greeting. Make sure someone is going to greet people at the door. And clean your toilets. Have you ever been to a restaurant and your meal's been ruined because you needed to go to the loo and it was disgusting? And you think, whoa, if it's like that, what's the kitchen's like? And it ruins your meal. It ruins your evening. Make sure your toilets are clean in the building. When people visit, they feel comfortable because they see this and they know the care that you have. Is there somewhere where someone could go to change the baby's nappy? Is there a private place, a room that someone can go to feed the baby? Maybe your community is full of older people and that's not necessary. But if it is, make sure it's available. So you've got older people that might have trouble standing up. Is there a rail in the toilet that they can use to help pull themselves up? Attention to detail is going to make a massive difference to the way people view you. So make it easy for people to attend and let them have a good experience when they're there. And get in the habit of just inviting people to church. Don't wait for a big effort. Just invite people. So we need to study who lives around where we meet. Is it older people? Is it students, young families? Are they British? Or are they Eastern European? Or African? Or Indian? Who is it that is around the place where we are? And are we appealing to them in a way that they can understand us? Who is in your community and how can you reach them? If you need to find help finding out, go to the library. They'll give you a demographic study who is in whatever neighbourhood. In fact, if you're choosing a neighbourhood to go and try and reach out to, go to your library and ask what kind of people are there. What is the average person there like? How can you reach out to them? Who is like you so that you can reach out to them? You know what you like, so you can adapt that to invite people. Don't compromise the message, but find out what would appeal to people. If it's an older generation, maybe an afternoon tea or a coffee morning. If it's younger people, maybe some kind of youth event. Find out who you're trying to reach and make sure you don't waste money and effort and leaflets and whatever on putting things through the doors of people that it's just not relevant to. Don't compromise the message. Have I said that enough? Preach the word in an understandable way, though. Now, get ready for this one. Are you ready? You might consider changing your preferred Bible translation. You heard right. Church of the first century didn't speak in the language of the 1600s of England. They spoke in a language that people understood. Now, you might be comfortable because you're brought up knowing a particular version of the Bible. But is that something that today's people can understand? If not, why are you using it? What's important is not what's comfortable to you and what you feel happy with. What's important is people can understand what we're telling them. So you might consider using a different version of the Bible. Be willing to change your methods, and that's just one. Speak in a way people will understand. Now, I'm fairly sure that door knocking doesn't really work now, so I'm not going to rely on that. I need to think on something else. We need to try and do something else. Don't attempt to change who you are either. If you're 60 years of age, act like a 60-year-old, so people know 60-year-olds go there. If you're 30 years of age, act like a 30-year-old, so 30-year-old people know that they're welcome there. Reach out to your age group. Say, well, we've got no young people. We're all a bit older. We're all in the 60s. Well, that's great. Reach out to people who are 60. Guess what? A lot of them have got children that are grown up, and their grown-up children have got children. So they have children and grandchildren. If you invite a 60-year-old friend, they feel welcome and they accept the gospel, they can be the ones that will bring those younger generations in. So don't try and attract the young if you're 60. Attract 60-year-olds like yourself. Now, young people, and you might be in a younger congregation, and you've got no old people, and how do we reach them? Well, I'll tell you what, reach out to people your age, teenagers or young adult. Reach out to them, and guess what? If you bring people your age in, and they feel welcome, and they accept the gospel, they could tell their parents and their grandparents, and they will be the ones who will reach that age group. So just be yourself and reach out to your generation and let them then bring those of their younger or older generations themselves. So don't try and run a youth club if you're too old for it. Invite someone for a coffee. That's more my style these days. Have a plan, but don't attempt to reinvent the wheel. Find someone who's doing what you desire and what you need, and learn from them. What's working somewhere else? Adapt that. And if you've got new ideas, why not share them with others? The demographics of our culture are changing faster than the church's ability to reach that culture. Christianity is not dead, but our church culture, the way we do church, is. And that's because we're trying to follow a pattern instead of a person. It is dead because the church has failed to keep up with and understand the changes happening around about us. We remain confined in our traditions where we feel safe. And I feel safe. I long for the good old days. I crave hearing the hymns when I was young. Just the volume of them and the crescendo that a lot of the old hymns used to have. I long for that. But that's not going to help today's people. That's nice for me. It's not going to reach a new generation of people for Christ. Let's not remain confined in our traditions where we feel safe. Let's not hide our lights under the proverbial church bushel. We have the saving message that people need to hear. What are we going to do to make sure they hear it? We must speak the unchanged and unchangeable good news of Jesus Christ. Teach it without compromise. What we must compromise are our traditions. What we must compromise are what I prefer. What we must compromise are our sacred habits, our rituals, and our customs. We must compromise them if we need to in order to reach the culture around about us while still preaching and teaching the truth. God is opening a window of opportunity for the church now. And it wasn't available to the first century church, the things that we can do now in reaching out with the gospel. We can reach this lost world like it's never been reached before. And surely the way things are in the world, people are looking for something, or rather looking for someone to save them from this mess. Let's seize the opportunity and reach and change our culture for good. Not by calling people to a pattern, but by calling them to a person, Jesus Christ.